Carnac, Brittany, June 21st, 4600 BCE. 5,000 standing stones stretch 4 kilometers across the plain. The solstice sun is rising. And one man, one specific man, whose bones will be found thousands of years from now and whose DNA will be sequenced by a team at the University of Copenhagen, positions himself inside the alignment and watches the shadows move. He belongs to a genetic lineage called haplogroup G2A. His father carried it. His sons will carry it. His people have been building monuments like this for generations. They will keep building them for another 1,600 years. And then, around 3000 BCE, they will stop. Not because they chose to, because they were gone. I'm going to tell you that up front, because I think you deserve the real story, not the mystery box version. We already know who built the megaliths. What we don't know, what nobody has been willing to say clearly until now, is what happened to them. And what the DNA is showing us from papers published in the last 6 months is one of the most complete civilizational erasures in human history. Hidden in plain sight, beneath the most famous monuments on Earth. In April 2026, a team led by Dr. Frederik Valeur Seersholm at the Globe Institute in Copenhagen published the results of a genetic study of 132 individuals buried in a large megalithic tomb near Berry, France, about 50 kilometers north of Paris. The site was used during 2 separate periods, and when the team compared the genomes of the people buried in period 1 against the people buried in period 2, they found something that stopped the analysis cold. The 2 groups were not related at all. The earlier population, Northern and Central European Neolithic farmers, had simply ceased to exist in this region. The later population had arrived from the south, from Iberia and southern France, and moved in. No intermarriage, no gradual blending. A stop, and then a start, with completely different people. This isn't just historical, this is in your DNA right now. Or more precisely, it explains why something is missing from it. If you are of northwestern European ancestry, the people who built Stonehenge, Newgrange, and Carnac are almost certainly not in your paternal line. The stones are still standing, the bloodline is not. Every documentary you've ever seen about these monuments ends with something like, "And their legacy lives on in us today." The genome data says that's not what happened. These people were replaced. And the question we should be asking, the one nobody was asking until very recently, is what exactly replaced them? A civilization that built 35,000 monuments across Europe, that understood solstice alignments, that fed thousands, coordinated labor across generations, connected communities across hundreds of miles. They left no name, no word in any language we can identify as theirs. No mythology, no tradition, no recognizable descendant culture. The stones are the only testimony, and we are only now learning to read them. Every testimony has a gap, and the gap in this one is 5,000 years of assuming we already knew who these people were. Niedertiefenbach, Central Germany, 3200 BCE. Inside a gallery tomb 18 meters long, the walls of which carry the oldest engravings of wheeled wagons ever found in Europe, a man places the body of his son. The son didn't grow up here. He came from a community 225 kilometers to the north. They were from different cultural groups, buried under different archaeological labels, separated by a distance that would take a modern car 2.5 hours to cover. They were father and son. The DNA confirmed it. A team of researchers led by Dr. Nicolas Antonio da Silva at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, Germany, published this finding in Science in May 2026. They analyzed 203 genomes from 6 megalithic grave complexes in Germany, sites associated with the Wartburg culture and the Western Funnel Beaker groups. These 2 cultures had long been treated as archaeologically distinct. The DNA said something different. Genetically, they formed a single, homogeneous population. And embedded in that population were first-degree family relationships spanning up to 225 kilometers. A father and son, separated by the distance of a modern train journey, buried in monuments belonging to what we'd labeled as different peoples. But here's where it gets strange. The previous assumption was that women in Neolithic communities moved locally, within about 8 kilometers of where they were born. Men stayed put. That's what the older studies showed. This new data breaks that picture entirely. Long-distance kinship ties involved both women and men. The researchers found evidence of what they're calling patchwork families, households with non-biological kin, children possibly sent to other communities as fostered apprentices, social bonds extending far beyond the local settlement. These weren't isolated Stone Age villages, sealed off by geography and distance. They were running a continental kinship network. The Wartburg Gallery tombs held up to 350 people, not royalty, not a ruling family, everyone. These were civic institutions, communal infrastructure for the dead of an entire region. The oldest wall engravings of wagons in Europe are in a tomb, not a palace. These people knew what wheels were. They drew them. They moved goods and people and information across hundreds of miles. And nobody outside the record they left in stone knows what they called themselves. 400 years after the Niedertiefenbach father buried his son in that gallery tomb, the civilization that produced them would be gone. Neither of them knew it was coming. Neither did anyone alive in their world. Somewhere in the 4 centuries that followed, something would go wrong at a scale that left no record except bones. And for the next 5,000 years, nobody would know to look. Bones remember things the living don't. A megalithic passage tomb in Falbygden, Sweden, 3100 BCE. 108 individuals buried across 4 generations. A research team excavates the site in 2019 looking for kinship patterns in the DNA. What they find instead, in the dental pulp, in the microscopic tissue that holds genetic material longest, is Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that 4,400 years later will be known as the Black Death. It is not in one person. It is in at least 17% of the entire excavated population, spread across large geographic distances, recurring in at least 3 distinct waves within a span of approximately 120 years. Dr. Pooja Swally and her colleagues at the Wellcome Sanger Institute and University College London published this in Nature in July 2024. What makes it different from earlier plague discoveries is the scale. This isn't a sporadic case in one individual. This is population-level evidence of a pathogen moving systematically through communities that were deeply interconnected. The same kinship networks we just discussed, now working in reverse. The network that connected father to son across 225 kilometers was also connecting community to community when someone fell ill. And yet, the data shows the opposite of what you'd expect from a catastrophic outbreak. This strain of plague didn't spread through fleas. The flea transmission mechanism didn't exist yet. It moved person to person, slowly, which means these communities didn't collapse in weeks. They absorbed this pathogen across generations. The plague visited their grandparents, then their parents, then them. And they kept building monuments while it happened. Think about that for a second. The elevated child mortality the Seersholm team found at the Bury site in France, unusually high death rates among children and young adults in the earlier burial phase. This is what a population under sustained biological siege looks like. Not a sudden catastrophe. Attrition. Slow, generational, invisible to the people living through it. The Bury site confirmed plague was present. Dr. Laure Salanova, research director at France's National Center for Scientific Research, was direct about what the demographic data showed. The pattern was, in her words, a strong indicator of crisis. High mortality among the young. The monument absorbing the evidence. Here's what that means structurally. The monument tradition itself, the communal burial chamber where the entire community gathered to inter its dead, may have been the disease vector, the living gathering to carry the dead inside, in close contact with recently deceased individuals who died of an active infection. Generation after generation. The Yersinia pestis lineage found in these Neolithic megalith builders is ancestral to every strain of plague that has circulated in human populations since, including the one that killed 30 million people in the 14th century. The people who built the stone circles are gone. The disease that helped erase them is not. Not gone, not finished. Still working on us, in ways we haven't been honest about. Newgrange, Ireland. 3200 BCE. The chamber has been designed so that on the winter solstice, 1 day a year, for precisely 17 minutes, a shaft of light penetrates the entrance passage and illuminates a triple spiral carved into the back wall. The engineering required to achieve this is not an accident. Whoever calculated that angle understood geometry, solar movement, and long-term construction planning. They knew exactly what they were building and exactly what it would do for centuries after they died. The man buried at the center of that chamber, whose genome Dr. Lara Cassidy of Trinity College Dublin analyzed and published in Nature in 2020, carries something unusual in his DNA, something rare. His genomic signature shows that his parents were either siblings or parent and child, a first-degree incestuous union. In the most carefully constructed, most elaborately positioned burial chamber in Neolithic Ireland. Cassidy's team argued this was evidence of a dynastic elite, a ruling class that maintained its bloodline through incest, the way Egyptian pharaohs and Inca god kings did millennia later. The monument wasn't just a tomb, it was a statement of power. One family controlling the labor of thousands, interred at the center of their greatest architectural achievement. Everything I just told you? Hold on to it, because it's about to mean something completely different. In June 2025, a separate team led by Professor Penny Bickle at the University of York published a study in Antiquity that looked at the same burial evidence and reached the opposite conclusion. Their argument? The broader pattern of megalithic burials in Ireland shows no consistent signs of hierarchy. The communities that built and used these monuments appear to have been egalitarian, communally organized farming societies. The Newgrange individual, referred to in the literature as NG10, is an outlier, not a representative. His incestuous parentage is a one-off in a dataset that otherwise points towards shared, collective social organization. Two teams, same bones, opposite conclusions. Actually, hold on. Before we go further, I want to ask you something. Drop it in the comments. When you've stood at a stone circle or seen Stonehenge or Carnac, what story did you tell yourself about who built it? Elite rulers? A spiritual community? Ordinary farmers with an extraordinary project? I genuinely read them, because your instinct about that question connects directly to what I'm about to tell you, and I think it might surprise you either way. The debate between Cassidy and Bickle isn't really about one man's parentage. It's about what drives a civilization to build at this scale. Is it coercive power, one family commanding thousands? Or is it communal grief architecture, a society collectively building the largest funerary infrastructure in human history because plague is killing its children and someone needs to hold the dead? The triple spiral at Newgrange has absorbed 5,200 solstice illuminations since it was carved. Each year, for 17 minutes, the chamber fills with winter light. Then darkness returns. The person who engineered that alignment left no name, no tradition, no recognizable religious successor. The spiral still works. The bloodline does not exist in the modern record. At the scale of a continent, individual survival is a statistic. The Allée Sépulcrale at Berry, France. Somewhere between 3,100 and 2,900 BCE. The monument is standing, the passage is accessible, the stone walls are intact, and no one is being buried there. Not because there are no dead, there are always dead. But the people who would have carried those dead inside, who built this structure, who used it, who understood what it was for, are no longer present in this region in sufficient numbers to do it. The Seersholm team's 2026 data makes this visible in a way that purely archaeological evidence never could. Phase 1 burials at Berry, 3,200 to 3,100 BCE, Northern and Central European Neolithic ancestry. Phase 2 burials, extending to approximately 2450 BCE, a genetically distinct population with strong links to southern France and Iberia. Between the two phases, a gap, not a transition, not a gradual handover, a stop and then a start, with people who share no meaningful genetic relationship with the ones who came before. Dr. Martin Sikora, associate professor at the University of Copenhagen and senior author of the study, put it plainly, quote, "We see a clear genetic break between the two periods. You are looking at a monument used by two completely unrelated populations. The gap between them is invisible in stone. It is only visible in bone. And the gap is a civilization." The archaeology of Europe has spent a century asking why megalith building ended. The assumption was always that the same population simply changed its practices, shifted to bell beaker aesthetics, adopted new burial customs, moved on. The DNA removes that assumption. The practices didn't change, the population changed. In at least some regions, the people who came after 3000 BCE moved into monuments they did not build, burying their dead in chambers constructed by people they were not related to and may never have known existed. There's one more detail from the skeletal analysis that stops me every time I think about it. At Penoria, a megalithic necropolis in Spain, a 2024 study found that twice as many women as men were buried in the final generations of the site's use. Male mortality was dramatically elevated. Not warrior casualties, the trauma patterns don't support that. Attrition. Something was killing the men of these communities at a higher rate across the last generations before the populations ceased to exist in the record. The monument held the evidence. For decades, the end of megalith building was classified as a cultural shift, a change in fashion, new ideas arriving from the continent. The DNA says the opposite is precisely true. It was not a cultural shift, it was an extinction event. And the culture that moved in afterward brought no memory of what it replaced. Acknowledgement is what bone provides when language has failed. Southern France, approximately 2800 BCE. A small group of people with Iberian genetic signatures are moving north. They are not an army. There's no evidence of warfare at the bury site, no trauma on the skeletal remains, no defensive modifications to the monument, no burn layers, no weapons caches. They are not conquering a landscape. They are filling a void. The population that built and used this monument is no longer present in sufficient numbers to hold the territory. The fields are going back to forest. The pollen record shows it. The vegetation layers confirm it. 600 years of cleared farmland is being reclaimed by wilderness. And into this demographic vacuum, newcomers from the south begin to arrive. The Seersholm team documented their genetic character clearly. Strong affinity with southern French and Iberian Neolithic ancestry. Distinct from the previous population, distinct also from the Yamnaya steppe migrants who were simultaneously moving into Scandinavia and northern Germany from the east. There are three things this study revealed. The third one is the one that changes everything. First, the replacement in France came from the south, Iberian farmers moving into a depopulated zone. Second, the replacement in Scandinavia came from the east, Yamnaya pastoralists from the steppe, documented in a landmark 2024 nature study by Professor Morten Allentoft at Curtin University and the University of Copenhagen, analyzing over 1,600 ancient individuals, who showed that Yamnaya descendants replaced megalith-building Neolithic farmers in what is now Denmark within 2 to 3 generations. Third, these were not the same event. Two separate replacement populations, two separate directions of origin. One underlying Western Neolithic civilization squeezed simultaneously from the south and east in roughly the same 200-year window. The megalith builders were caught in a demographic pincer they could not see, and neither replacement population appears to have known the other was happening. A woman buried in the Phase 2 berry population carries Iberian ancestry markers. She is interred in a gallery tomb her biological ancestors did not build, in a region her genetic lineage did not clear, among the bones of people she is not related to. She is not erasing them, she is simply present. The architecture does not distinguish between the hands that built it and the dead it now receives. And here's what the 2026 data carries that has received almost no coverage. The pollen record at Berry, the environmental evidence preserved in the soil layers, shows forest regeneration coinciding exactly with the burial gap. The farmland the first population cleared and maintained for 600 years simply went back to wilderness. The fields were abandoned. The question is whether the people left or died. The DNA says the latter. The latter explanation, disease, was the one scientists spent 30 years trying to confirm. And by 2024, it looked like they had. Stockholm, July 2024. The Swally team at the Wellcome Sanger Institute publishes the definitive population-scale study of Neolithic plague. 108 individuals from Scandinavian megalithic graves. Plague confirmed in at least 17% of the sample. 3 discrete infection events, spreading within a documented 6-generation kinship group. And here's the mechanism nobody had fully articulated before. The burial chamber itself was the vector. The living gathered to inter their dead, in close contact with recently deceased individuals who may have died of an active infection. The communal practice that defined this civilization, the shared tomb, the collective grave, the monument that held everyone, was the very thing circulating the pathogen through it. The picture was complete. Plague, transmitted through the burial tradition itself, circulating in 3 waves across 120 years. Elevated child mortality, male attrition, environmental stress, fields going back to forest, demographic vacuum, replacement populations moving in. The case was closed. And then Dr. Martin Sikora said 3 words that reopened everything. In the 2026 Seersholm paper, the study of 132 individuals at Bury, Sikora was the senior author. And when the results came back, he made a statement that should have been the headline in every science publication that covered this story. Quote, "We can confirm that plague was present, but the evidence does not support it as the sole cause of the population collapse. The decline was likely driven by a combination of disease, environmental stress, and other disruptive events." Other disruptive events. 3 words, no elaboration. The paper does not specify what those events were. That's not vagueness, that's intellectual honesty. The data points to something operating alongside plague and alongside environmental stress, something that together with those 2 variables produced a replacement so complete that no genetic trace of the original male population survived in any dominant way. But that 3rd variable remains unnamed in the 2026 literature. Now, the radiocarbon dating from the Bury site places the burial gap beginning at approximately 3,100 to 3,050 BCE. Within the margin of dating uncertainty, that window overlaps with one of the most climatically unstable periods in European Holocene history, a period of cooling, crop failure risk, and disrupted agricultural cycles that would have been devastating to farming communities already weakened by plague and already experiencing elevated mortality. But whether climate was the other disruptive event Sikora's team couldn't name, that is a question the current data cannot definitively answer. That is a different episode. What we know right now is this. The answer we had, plague, is real, confirmed, documented, and it is not enough. Something else was there, and we don't know what it was yet. There is nothing different about Stonehenge. June 21st, 2026. 10,000 people gather on Salisbury Plain for the solstice. They raise their phones. Some are moved, some are quiet. Many of them feel something they describe as connection, to the past, to their ancestry, to the long human story of this island. The feeling is real. I'm not dismissing it. But what they're connecting to, what the DNA now tells us they are actually connecting to, is not what most of them think. In January 2024, Professor Morten Allentoft and an international team published 4 papers in Nature, drawing on genetic data from over 1,600 ancient individuals. One of the central findings concerns the Y chromosome, the paternal genetic lineage passed directly from father to son, unbroken across generations. The megalith builders carried a haplogroup called G2A. It was their defining paternal marker. Modern British, Irish, French, and German men carry a haplogroup called R1b, associated with Yamnaya-derived and bell-beaker populations that expanded into Europe after the Neolithic collapse, at rates between 60 and 90%. G2A, the megalith builder signature, registers at under 5% in most northwestern European populations today, and the majority of that 5% traces to later migration events unconnected to the original builders. Stay with me, because this next part is the reason this video exists. If you've had your haplogroup tested and it shows R1b or I1, another marker associated with post-Neolithic Northern European populations, you are almost certainly descended from the people who came after the megalith builders, not from the builders themselves. You inherited the landscape, the fields they cleared, the trade routes they established, the solstice alignments they engineered, but not the blood. The megalith builders, the people who raised the stones at Stonehenge, carved the triple spiral at Newgrange, laid out the 4 kilometers of standing stones at Carnac, are effectively absent from the paternal genetic record of modern northwestern Europe. They were replaced so completely that the monuments are the only material evidence they existed at all. The 10,000 people standing at Stonehenge in June 2026, feeling that pull of ancestral connection, are, in the most precise biological sense, visiting the memorial of a people they replaced. And one more thing, a thing that almost no coverage of this research has acknowledged. The Yamnaya, the steppe pastoralists who've carried the blame for displacing European Neolithic populations in popular accounts, didn't destroy the megalith builders. In much of Western Europe, the megalith builders were already demographically depleted before the Yamnaya-derived populations arrived. The collapse preceded the incursion. The replacement in France came from the south, not the east. The steppe migrants moved into a landscape that was already, in the Seersholm team's words, showing a clear genetic break. The wrong villain has been named for years. The actual cause of the vacuum, the other disruptive events, remains, as of this recording, unnamed in the peer-reviewed literature. There are names we will never have. Newgrange, 5:15 a.m., winter solstice. The light enters the passage for the 5,200th time since the triple spiral was carved. 17 minutes. Then the sun moves and it's gone. No one who shares the blood of the person who calculated that angle is alive to see it. Here's something the recent data makes possible that wasn't possible 5 years ago. The AADR, the Allen Ancient DNA Resource maintained by the Reich Lab at Harvard Medical School, now holds genome data from hundreds of ancient megalith-associated individuals. Researchers can compare those ancient signatures against haplogroup frequency data in modern populations. And what that comparison shows is this. Haplogroup G2A, the paternal marker of the megalith builders, persists in the modern world. Not in northwestern Europe, where it was displaced, but in Sardinia, in parts of the Caucasus, in pockets of South and Central Asia, where Neolithic farmer ancestry survived through different historical circumstances. If you've had your haplogroup tested and it shows G2A, a result fewer than 5 in 100 northwestern Europeans will see, there is a non-trivial biological probability that you carry a fragment of the same paternal lineage as the person who designed the Newgrange solstice alignment. Most people who see that result have no idea what it means. The people in the 5,200-year-old tomb at Niedertiefenbach didn't know what it meant either. The molecule connecting them is indifferent to whether either party understands it. If this changed something you thought you knew about your own deep ancestry, subscribe, because the next video goes somewhere this one couldn't follow. The question of what the other disruptive events actually were, and whether a team currently working in Leipzig has found the third variable that completes the picture. That paper is in peer review right now. The science isn't finished. The field of archaeogenomics has spent 15 years recovering what was erased. 203 genomes from 6 megalithic complexes in Germany, 132 from a tomb near Paris, 108 from passage graves in Sweden, 44 from Ireland. Each study a small return, bones speaking, names still withheld. We know their genetic architecture. We know how far their sons traveled. We know the shape of the pathogen that weakened them. We know the populations that came after. We know the haplogroup frequencies that show, in cold numerical terms, how completely they were replaced. We do not know what they called themselves. We do not know what language they used when they carried their dead inside those chambers. We do not know if any of them understood what was happening, whether anyone, in the last generations before the burial record goes silent, looked at a monument their great-grandparents had built and felt the specific weight of knowing their people were running out of time. The stones are still standing. They are the only thing these people left that their replacements could not carry away. And for 5,000 years, we looked at those stones and thought we recognized ourselves.